The sun blazed over Washington, D.C. as travelers streamed in and out of Union Station. Among the crowd walked Lieutenant General Angela Freeman, a poised African-American woman in her early 50s. Dressed not in uniform, but in a crisp navy blazer and slacks, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had commanded thousands. Few in the bustling station realized who she was, or what she had given to the nation. Angela moved with calm precision, her leather briefcase tucked securely under her arm. Inside were classified documents for a Pentagon briefing she was scheduled to deliver within the hour. Her train had been delayed, and she was now pressed for time, weaving swiftly through the terminal. That was when 2 police officers noticed her. They stood by a security checkpoint, eyes narrowing as they watched her stride past. Something about her confidence seemed to challenge them. One officer stepped forward, blocking her path. "Ma'am, slow down," he ordered, his tone sharp. Angela stopped, her chin lifting. "I'm on official business. Please step aside." The officer's partner smirked. "Official business? You don't look very official to me. Let's see some ID." With a steady hand, Angela reached into her blazer pocket and produced her Pentagon badge. Instead of respecting it, the officer scoffed. "Fake, huh? You people will try anything." A ripple of offense moved through the nearby crowd. Angela's voice remained firm but measured. "Officer, you are making a mistake. Step aside now." But that single phrase, spoken with the authority of a leader, was all it took. The officer's eyes narrowed with arrogance. "Oh, so you're talking back? Fine. Let's do this the hard way." And within seconds, handcuffs clicked shut around the wrists of a United States general. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Angela Freeman's wrists as the 2 officers tightened them far beyond what was necessary. The sound of the cuffs echoed in the terminal, drawing startled gasps from onlookers. People began pulling out their phones, recording the unbelievable scene. A poised, middle-aged black woman, in professional attire, being dragged by armed police as if she were a criminal. Angela remained calm, her posture rigid. Years of discipline in the military had taught her composure under fire. But inside, fury surged, not for herself, but for what this spectacle represented. "Officer, you have no authority to detain me," she stated clearly, her voice commanding but even. "Release me at once." The taller officer sneered. "You don't give the orders here. You should have kept your mouth shut." "Talking back never ends well," his partner added, tugging her forward as if to parade her humiliation. The crowd stirred uneasily. A man shouted, "She showed you her ID!" Another woman called out, "That's harassment!" The officers ignored them, dragging Angela toward a side corridor. Her briefcase fell, papers spilling across the floor. One sheet bore the Pentagon seal. A teenager in the crowd gasped, holding up his phone. "That's government stuff!" Angela turned her head toward the onlookers, her calm eyes locking with the cameras recording every second. "Remember this moment," she said firmly. "Remember who's truly abusing power here." Her words carried a weight that silenced the crowd momentarily. As the officers forced her into a holding area, the murmurs outside grew into chants. "Let her go! Let her go!" But Angela knew something the officers didn't. With a single phone call, their arrogance would shatter, and their careers would crumble into dust. The holding room was stark and unwelcoming. 4 concrete walls, a metal chair, and a table bolted to the floor. Lieutenant General Angela Freeman sat upright, her hands still cuffed, her expression unreadable. The 2 officers stood by the door, whispering smugly, convinced they had put her in her place. Finally, Angela broke the silence. "You've made a grave mistake. I demand 1 phone call." The taller officer scoffed. "This isn't a movie. You don't just get a call because you say so." Angela tilted her head, her gaze razor-sharp. "Legally, I'm entitled. And when the Pentagon learns you denied me this right, it won't be me in handcuffs. It'll be you." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Reluctantly, one shoved a phone toward her, still keeping her cuffed. "Fine. 1 call. Make it quick." Angela dialed a number from memory, her voice calm as the line connected. "This is Lieutenant General Freeman. I need to speak to the Secretary of Defense. Now." The room went dead silent. The officers froze, the smugness draining from their faces. A pause, then a powerful voice answered, "Angela, what's happened?" "Mr. Secretary," Angela replied firmly, "I've been unlawfully detained at Union Station by 2 officers who dismissed my credentials and handcuffed me without cause. I require immediate intervention." The secretary's voice thundered through the receiver. "Stay where you are. I'll handle this personally. They have no idea what they've just done." Angela set the phone down slowly, her eyes never leaving the officers. Her voice was steady, almost serene. "You have 5 minutes before your world collapses." The two men shifted nervously, their arrogance evaporating as the weight of their mistake settled in. The seconds ticked by like thunderclaps in the holding room. Angela sat perfectly still, exuding the aura of someone who knew she was in complete control. The two officers hovered near the door, whispering to each other, their earlier confidence slipping away with each passing moment. Finally, one of them cleared his throat. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. If you just cooperate, we can smooth this out." Angela slowly turned her head, her eyes narrowing. "Smooth this out? You put your hands on a United States Army Lieutenant General. You handcuffed me, humiliated me in public, and ignored federal identification. Tell me, how exactly do you intend to smooth that out?" The officers had no answer. Suddenly, the door swung open. A uniformed airport security chief stepped in, his face pale. Behind him, two men in dark suits from the Department of Defense entered briskly, their badges flashing under the harsh fluorescent light. "General Freeman," one said respectfully, unlocking her cuffs immediately. "On behalf of the Pentagon, we apologize for this outrageous misconduct." Angela rubbed her wrists lightly, her composure intact. She didn't even look at the officers as they stood frozen, their mouths half open. The security chief stammered. "Ma'am, we weren't aware of your—" Angela cut him off sharply. "My rank was irrelevant. I showed you credentials. You ignored them because of your prejudice. That will be on record." The Pentagon official turned to the officers, his voice like a blade. "You've just assaulted a 3-star general. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Their faces drained of color. Angela rose to her full height, her voice cold but controlled. "This is no longer about me. This is about accountability. And accountability is coming, for both of you." By the time Angela Freeman walked back into the terminal, freed from the cuffs and flanked by Pentagon officials, the scene had transformed into a spectacle. Hundreds of travelers stood clustered together, phones raised high, recording every second. The footage of her arrest had already spread online, and now the dramatic reversal was being captured live. Gasps and applause broke out as the crowd saw the men in suits treating her with respect, addressing her as General Freeman. People whispered in disbelief. "She's a general." "Those cops are finished." The two officers followed several steps behind, their faces pale, suddenly stripped of the swagger they had worn only minutes earlier. Shouts rang out from the crowd. "Shame on you! She showed you her ID! Respect our soldiers!" The noise swelled, a chorus of anger and outrage. The officers tried to avoid the cameras, but it was useless. Their humiliation was already being streamed across social media. Angela stopped in the middle of the terminal and faced the crowd. Though her expression was calm, her voice carried with commanding authority. "I was not just arrested as a general, I was arrested as a black woman whose word was dismissed, whose credentials were ignored, and whose dignity was denied. That is the truth you all witnessed." The terminal erupted in applause. Some passengers chanting her name. "Freeman, Freeman." Reporters shoved microphones forward, demanding a statement. Angela raised a hand. "This is bigger than me. This is about the thousands of people who face this injustice every day without cameras to protect them. Today I stand for them." Her words struck like lightning. In that instant, Angela Freeman ceased to be just a soldier. She became a symbol of defiance and dignity. Within hours, the incident had reached Washington, D.C. The video of General Angela Freeman in handcuffs was on every major news network, spreading like wildfire across the nation. Hashtags demanding justice trended globally. Inside the Pentagon, senior officials gathered in a war room, faces grim as the footage replayed on a massive screen. Secretary of Defense, Mitchell himself, stood at the head of the table, his jaw tight. One of our highest-ranking officers was humiliated in public, treated like a criminal. This is not only an insult to General Freeman, but to the United States military itself. A 4-star general leaned forward. "The optics are catastrophic. If this is how we treat one of our own generals, what does it say about ordinary citizens facing this daily?" Mitchell's voice hardened. "Then we must respond decisively. Those officers must face consequences, and the public must see that we will not tolerate abuse of power against our soldiers or our citizens." Meanwhile, Angela sat in a quiet Pentagon office, sipping water, her face composed despite the storm raging outside. She wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about every young black soldier who doubted whether the country truly respected them. A Pentagon official entered, saluting sharply. "General, the Secretary is requesting your statement for the press conference. He believes your voice should lead this response." Angela nodded slowly. She understood the weight of this moment. Her humiliation had become a national reckoning. Her words would either calm a furious nation or ignite a fire that could not be contained. She rose to her feet, her uniform impeccable, her presence commanding. "Very well," she said. "If they wanted to silence me, they've succeeded in doing the opposite. Now, the entire country will hear my voice." Flashes from cameras lit up the Pentagon briefing room as reporters crammed shoulder to shoulder, their voices buzzing with questions. The air was electric. Everyone knew this was more than just another press conference. When the double doors opened, silence swept the room. General Angela Freeman entered in full dress uniform, her rows of ribbons gleaming beneath the harsh lights. She walked with the calm authority of someone who had faced battlefields far worse than this. She stood at the podium scanning the sea of cameras and microphones. Then she spoke, her voice steady, deliberate. "Yesterday at Union Station, I was unlawfully detained by officers who ignored my credentials, dismissed my authority, and handcuffed me without cause. I was not targeted because I was a general. I was targeted because I am a black woman who dared to speak firmly." The room fell into stunned silence. Angela's words cut deeper than any headline. "I want to be clear," she continued. "This is not about one incident or two officers. This is about a culture where prejudice overrides judgment, where respect is granted only when forced, and where countless citizens endure indignities with no cameras to capture their truth." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I wear this uniform to defend this nation and every person in it, but today, I was reminded that the battles we fight abroad are not the only ones that matter. We must also fight the battles here, against injustice, against arrogance, and against the abuse of authority." Reporters scribbled frantically, some visibly moved. The statement was not just an explanation, it was a call to action. Angela Freeman had turned her humiliation into a national declaration. The press conference shook the nation. Within hours, networks replayed Angela Freeman's speech on loop, her powerful words resonating far beyond military circles. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #StandWithFreeman and #JusticeForGenerals dominated every platform. Clips of her in handcuffs were now paired with her thunderous declaration at the podium. Meanwhile, the two officers found themselves at the center of a firestorm. Their names and faces were plastered across screens, dissected in news panels, and condemned in public forums. Their department scrambled to issue a statement. "We are conducting a full investigation into the incident involving General Freeman. The actions of these officers do not reflect our values." But the public wasn't buying it. Civil rights leaders held rallies outside the airport, chanting Angela's words, "We must fight the battles here." Veterans groups, furious that a decorated general was treated with such contempt, joined the outcry. Even members of Congress demanded swift accountability. Angela, however, kept her composure. She sat in her Pentagon office, watching the storm unfold. One aide entered with a tablet. "General, CNN is reporting that both officers have been suspended pending investigation." Angela nodded, her voice calm. "Suspension is a start, but suspension won't erase the humiliation, not just mine, but of every person who's endured this quietly." She knew her battle wasn't against two men in uniform. It was against a system that allowed arrogance and bias to flourish. Across the nation, people who had once felt powerless now saw in her a voice for their own struggles. The incident was no longer about Union Station. It was about justice itself. And Angela Freeman had become its most unyielding champion. The Secretary of Defense convened an emergency meeting with senior Pentagon officials. The video of Angela Freeman's arrest had already tarnished the reputation of law enforcement and shaken public confidence. Something decisive had to be done. "Gentlemen," Secretary Mitchell said, his tone sharp, "our general was handcuffed and humiliated in broad daylight. The entire world saw it. If we appear weak in our response, the damage will not only be domestic, it will be international." An admiral spoke up. "Respect for rank is one thing, sir, but this was more than rank. This was bias and abuse of power. The public will not forgive symbolic punishment. They want accountability. Mitchell nodded gravely. Then accountability they will have. He turned to his legal counsel. Draft the statement. Effective immediately, the Pentagon will call for the termination and prosecution of the officers involved. Their actions constitute unlawful detention and assault of a senior federal official. Word of the Pentagon's ultimatum spread like wildfire. The announcement hit national headlines within the hour. Commentators described it as the strongest federal response to misconduct in recent memory. Back at the Pentagon, Angela listened quietly as an aide read the statement aloud. She didn't smile, but her eyes hardened with resolve. This isn't about vengeance, she reminded them. This is about precedent. If even a general can be treated this way, then what chance does a teenager on a street corner have? This has to mean something. The aide nodded, visibly moved. General, you've started something bigger than they ever imagined. Angela rose from her chair, straightening her jacket. No, she said firmly. We've only just begun. The ultimatum was clear, the officers' careers were finished, and a national reckoning had only begun. Detective Rowe and Officer Daniels sat in a cramped conference room at their precinct, their faces pale as stone. Both had been summoned by the chief of police, who sat across from them with folded arms and a look of utter disappointment. You two don't need me to explain what's happening, the chief began, voice low but firm. The Pentagon has issued a formal statement. They're not just calling for your suspension. They're calling for your termination and prosecution. Rowe tried to protest. Chief, we didn't know she was a general. The chief slammed a fist on the table. That's the point. It shouldn't have mattered if she was a general or a grocery clerk. She showed you credentials and you ignored them. You made it about power. And now the entire department is paying the price. Daniels buried his face in his hands. We just thought she was mouthing off. We didn't think it would go this far. The chief's voice grew sharper. You didn't think. That's the problem. And now you've humiliated not only this department, but the nation. There's no coming back from this. News crews waited outside the precinct, hungry for footage of the disgraced officers. Protesters held signs reading, "Justice for Freeman!" "And no one is above the law," Rowe muttered bitterly. "Our careers are over." The chief leaned forward, eyes like steel. Careers? You're lucky if this ends with just your careers. You handcuffed a federal officer, a general. Do you understand the prison time you could be facing? The room was suffocating with silence. For the first time, the two officers felt what it meant to have no power at all. Their arrogance had ended their careers. Now, it might cost them their freedom. Across America, living rooms, offices, and cafes buzzed with the same conversation. The footage of Angela Freeman's arrest replayed on every television screen, dissected by anchors and debated by panels of experts. It wasn't just news. It was a mirror reflecting the deep fractures in the country. In Detroit, veterans gathered at a VFW hall, slamming their fists on tables in outrage. She wore the same uniform we did, one Marine barked. And they treated her like trash. That's a disgrace to every man and woman who's ever served. In Atlanta, college students filled the campus quad with handmade signs. They marched, chanting Angela's words, "The battles we fight here." For many, she had become a living symbol of resistance and hope. Social media erupted with millions of voices. Some shared their own stories of humiliation at the hands of authority, writing, "If they can do this to a general, imagine what they do to us every day." Others rallied in solidarity, posting photos in uniform with the caption, "We stand with Freeman." Congressional leaders couldn't ignore the storm. Hearings were announced to investigate systemic bias in policing. One senator declared on the Senate floor, "General Freeman's courage has forced this nation to confront truths we've ignored for too long." Angela herself avoided the spotlight for the moment. She stayed in her Pentagon office, reading letters pouring in from strangers, students, veterans, single mothers, soldiers overseas. Each one thanked her for standing tall, for refusing to let arrogance silence her. As she placed one letter aside, Angela whispered softly, "This was never just about me." The nation had found its voice through hers. And now, change was no longer a request, it was a demand. Before any courtroom could open its doors, the officers had already been tried and condemned in the court of public opinion. Their faces, once anonymous, were now splashed across screens worldwide. Editorial cartoons mocked their arrogance, while late-night hosts skewered their ignorance with biting humor. But not everyone laughed. For many, the incident was raw and personal. Survivors of wrongful arrests appeared on talk shows, recounting their own humiliations. "When I saw General Freeman in those cuffs," one man said tearfully, "I saw myself. I saw every time my dignity was stripped away." The story had become more than viral news. It was now a cultural reckoning. Universities hosted panels on race and authority. Churches preached sermons using Angela's ordeal as a metaphor for resilience. In barber shops, grocery stores, and kitchen tables, people debated what justice should truly look like. The officers' lawyers attempted damage control, releasing statements that claimed their clients acted on instinct and did not recognize the gravity of the situation. But these words rang hollow against the undeniable evidence captured on hundreds of phones. Meanwhile, Angela refused to fan the flames with personal attacks. In an interview with a respected journalist, she stated simply, "This isn't about two men. This is about a mindset. Change that mindset, and you change the nation." Her poise only deepened the public's admiration. She had become not just a victim, but a leader, a calm voice in a storm of anger. As the world waited for the official legal proceedings, one truth had already taken root. Angela Freeman's story had altered the way millions viewed authority. The officers had tried to silence her. Instead, they had amplified her voice to the very heart of the nation. The federal courthouse overflowed with reporters, activists, and veterans in uniform. The trial of officers Rowe and Daniels had become a national spectacle. News cameras lined the steps, capturing every arrival, every whisper, every tense glance. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The prosecution presented the evidence with chilling precision: the video footage, the Pentagon's sealed documents Angela had carried, and the testimony of dozens of witnesses who saw her credentials ignored. Each piece painted a picture not of a mistake, but of arrogance fueled by prejudice. The defense tried to spin the narrative. "My clients acted in the interest of public safety," their lawyer argued. They didn't recognize her authority at the time. It was a misunderstanding, but the jury wasn't convinced. The videos told the truth louder than words ever could. When Angela was called to the stand, the room fell silent. She took the oath and sat with perfect composure. "General Freeman," the prosecutor began, "can you describe what went through your mind when you were handcuffed?" Angela's voice was calm, but it carried like thunder. "I thought of every young black soldier under my command. I thought of every civilian who faces the same humiliation daily without a uniform to protect them. I stayed calm because I had to, but I also knew the cameras were watching, and I wanted the world to see the truth, unfiltered." The courtroom was transfixed. Even the judge leaned forward, listening intently. By the time Angela stepped down, the trial's outcome felt inevitable. The officers weren't just fighting for their careers anymore. They were fighting against the undeniable weight of justice. And for once, justice was no longer silent. The courtroom was packed to capacity when the jury returned. The air was heavy, each second stretching like an eternity. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras clicked, and the entire nation waited. The foreperson rose, voice steady. "On the charge of unlawful detention of a federal officer, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of assault, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of abuse of authority, we find the defendants guilty." Gasps rippled through the room. The judge's gavel struck. "Order." Rowe and Daniels sat motionless, their faces drained of all color. Their lawyer buried his head in his hands. The officers who once dragged a general in cuffs now awaited sentencing like common criminals. Outside the courthouse, crowds erupted in cheers. Veterans saluted Angela's name, while activists embraced, tears streaming down their faces. The chants began again. "Justice, justice, justice." But this time, they weren't cries of desperation. They were celebrations of victory. Inside, Angela remained composed. When the judge invited her to speak, she rose. "Your Honor, I don't rejoice in their downfall, but I do rejoice in accountability. Today the message is clear. No badge, no uniform, no arrogance places anyone above the law, and no dignity will be taken without consequence." The judge nodded, visibly moved. "Well said, General Freeman." Later, as Angela stepped into the sunlight, microphones swarmed her. She raised a hand, silencing the frenzy. "This isn't just the end of a trial, it's the beginning of a change. We've proven today that courage and truth are stronger than arrogance and hate. Let this moment be a promise. No one who stands for justice will ever stand alone." The crowd roared. Angela Freeman walked forward, not just as a general, but as a symbol of a nation awakening.